The bar fight started over a spilled drink and escalated to three men cornering a young soldier in uniform. But when the old man in the corner booth stood up and walked over, everything changed. Not because of what he said, but because of how he moved. And when the dust settled, the soldier realized the stranger who'd saved him was wearing a name tag that made his blood run cold. This is the kind of story they don't teach in history books. Before we dive into this tale of hidden heroes and forgotten legends, tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching today? And if you believe these untold stories deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These are the stories that matter, the ones that remind us that heroes walk among us every single day, invisible until someone finally sees them. O'Malley's pub had been serving the same neighborhood for 43 years. Red brick walls lined with vintage military memorabilia, wooden tables scarred by decades of conversations, and a jukebox that still played songs from wars most patrons were too young to remember. It was the kind of place where off-duty cops drank with construction workers, where veterans from different conflicts shared stories without asking too many questions about details that couldn't be shared. Friday nights brought a predictable crowd. Local regulars who claimed the same stools every week, younger professionals unwinding from corporate jobs, and occasionally military personnel from the nearby base looking for somewhere civilians wouldn't stare at their uniforms or ask uncomfortable questions about their service. On this particular Friday evening, Staff Sergeant Michael Torres sat alone at the bar, still wearing his army dress blues from a promotion ceremony earlier that day. 24 years old, 3 twos in Afghanistan behind him, Torres had stopped at O'Malley's for one beer before heading home to celebrate with his family. He wasn't looking for trouble, wasn't trying to draw attention, just wanted to decompress in a place where his uniform didn't make him a curiosity or target for political conversations he didn't want to have. But trouble found him anyway. In the corner booth near the back wall sat a man most patrons barely noticed. Joseph Martinez was 68 years old, gray-haired, wearing a simple button-down shirt and jeans that had seen better years. He came to O'Malley's twice a week, always ordered the same thing, whiskey neat, no chaser, and always sat alone reading paperback novels that looked older than some of the bartenders. The staff knew him as Joe, a quiet regular who tipped well and never caused problems. He'd been coming in for 5 years, ever since his wife died and his house became too quiet for a man who had spent most of his adult life surrounded by voices, orders, and the constant noise of military life. Martinez had been a Marine Corps drill instructor for 26 years, training recruits at Parris Island and later serving as a senior instructor at various military schools. He'd shaped thousands of young Marines, teaching them not just how to fight, but how to think under pressure, how to assess threats, and how to protect each other when civilian rules no longer apply. But that was before retirement, before civilian life, before choosing to drink alone rather than explain to strangers why he sometimes woke up shouting orders to recruits who were now middle-aged men scattered across the world. Martinez was halfway through his novel when he noticed the situation developing at the bar. 3 local men, construction workers by their appearance, had positioned themselves around Torres in a way that wasn't accidental. Their body language indicated aggression that was escalating beyond casual conversation. The leader, a heavy-set man with tattooed forearms, was standing too close to Torres, invading personal space in the deliberate way that preceded violence. His 2 companions had moved to flanking positions, cutting off Torres's access to the exit and creating what military personnel would recognize as a tactical disadvantage. Martinez set down his book and watched with the analytical eye of someone who had spent decades teaching young men how to survive encounters exactly like this one. "Hey, soldier boy," the leader was saying, his voice loud enough to draw attention from other patrons. "You think wearing that costume makes you special?" Torres remained calm, his training evident in the way he kept his hands visible and his voice steady. "No, sir. Just trying to enjoy my drink." "Just trying to enjoy your drink," the second man mimicked, moving closer. "What did you do over there? Kill any kids?" Martinez felt his jaw tighten. He'd heard this conversation before, had watched civilians who had never served project their political opinions onto individual soldiers who had no control over policy decisions made by people they'd never met. Torres was handling it well, maintaining composure under provocation that was designed to escalate into physical confrontation. But Martinez could see the tactical situation deteriorating. 3 against 1, flanking positions established, escape routes compromised, and an opponent group that was testing boundaries before committing to violence. The third man bumped into Torres from behind, causing him to spill his beer. "Oops," the man said with theatrical sarcasm. "Clumsy me." That's when Martinez recognized the situation was moving beyond verbal harassment into the territory where training kicks in and people get hurt. Torres turned to face the man who had bumped him, which was exactly what the 3 had wanted. Now his back was to the leader, his attention divided, his position compromised by people who understood street fighting but didn't understand that they were confronting someone trained in combat operations. "You got a problem with how I walk?" the third man asked, pushing Torres again. Martinez closed his book, placed it carefully on the table, and stood up. His movement was unhurried but purposeful, the kind of controlled motion that comes from muscle memory developed over decades of handling situations where mistakes had consequences beyond bruised egos. As he approached the confrontation, Martinez's mind shifted into instructor mode automatically. Assess the threat. Identify the primary aggressor. Calculate force necessary to neutralize without causing permanent damage. Protect the trainee while teaching the lesson that needed to be learned. "Gentlemen," Martinez said, his voice carrying across the bar with a kind of authority that made conversations stop and heads turn. "Is there a problem here?" The leader turned toward Martinez with the aggressive confidence of someone who had successfully bullied people in bars before. "Old man, this doesn't concern you. Walk away." Martinez smiled slightly, an expression that contained no warmth but significant information for anyone who knew how to read it. "Son, everything concerning this Marine concerns me." Torres looked at Martinez with surprise. The older man had called him a Marine, but Torres was Army. Then he noticed something that made his breathing change entirely. Pinned to Martinez's shirt, small and unobtrusive but clearly visible to anyone who knew what to look for, was a name tag. Not a civilian name tag, but military issue. Black metal with white lettering that read, "Gunnery, Student Martinez, USMC." Torres felt his world shift. Every Marine knew about Gunnery Sergeant Joseph Martinez, the legend who had trained 3 generations of Marines at Parris Island. The instructor whose reputation preceded him to every base, whose training methods were still being taught, whose name was whispered with equal parts respect and terror by Marines who had survived his programs. "Gunny Martinez," Torres whispered, his voice barely audible above the bar noise. Martinez didn't look at Torres. keeping his attention focused on the three men who had suddenly found themselves in a situation they didn't understand. "Staff Sergeant, these gentlemen seem to have questions about your service. I thought I might help provide some answers." The leader of the three looked between Martinez and Parris, sensing that the dynamic had changed but not understanding how or why. "Listen, old-timer, we don't want trouble with you. We just got issues with soldiers who..." Martinez cut him off with a gesture that was subtle but unmistakably commanding. "Son, you have issues with this Marine, you have issues with me. And I can promise you, that's not a conversation you want to continue." The second man stepped forward, either missing the warning signs or choosing to ignore them. "What are you going to do about it, Grandpa?" What happened next took less than 10 seconds, but would be discussed in the bar for years afterward. Martinez moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who had spent decades teaching young men how to disable opponents without permanent injury. He stepped inside the second man's guard, used his own momentum against him, and placed him face down on the floor with a joint lock that looked effortless but was excruciating for anyone trying to resist it. "Son," Martinez said conversationally, maintaining the lock while addressing the other two men, "that's what we call a compliance hold. Your friend is experiencing significant discomfort but no permanent damage. I can maintain this position for approximately 15 minutes without causing injury that would require medical attention." The leader took a step forward, then stopped as Martinez's eyes met his. There was something in that gaze that communicated information beyond words. The calm confidence of someone who had handled dangerous situations as routine business, who had been trained to escalate or de-escalate as circumstances required. However, Martinez continued, "If you gentlemen would prefer to continue this conversation, I should mention that I spent 26 years teaching Marines how to handle multiple opponents in close quarters combat. I'm retired now, but muscle memory is a difficult thing to forget." The third man was backing toward the exit, his earlier aggression replaced by the survival instinct that told him he was outmatched by someone whose capabilities exceeded his understanding. "We don't want any more trouble," the leader said. His voice noticeably quieter than before, Martinez released the joint lock and helped the second man to his feet with the same careful control he had used to put him down. "Excellent decision. I suggest you gentlemen find somewhere else to continue your evening." As the three men left, muttering apologies and avoiding eye contact, the bar slowly returned to its normal noise level. Conversations resumed, though many patrons kept glancing toward Martinez and Torres with new interest. Torres stood frozen, staring at the man who had just intervened on his behalf. Gunnery Sergeant Joseph Martinez was a legend in Marine Corps training circles. Stories about his methods, his results, and his ability to transform civilians into Marines were part of Corps folklore. "Gunny," Torres said, his voice carrying the respect that 3 tours of combat had taught him to reserve for people who had earned it. "I can't believe it's really you." Martinez straightened his shirt and returned to his booth, gesturing for Torres to join him. "Staff Sergeant, you handled that situation well. Maintained composure under provocation, avoided escalation, kept your hands visible and your voice controlled." Torres slid into the booth across from Martinez, still processing the encounter. "So, I thought you were just another civilian. I didn't recognize the name tag," Martinez said, touching the small piece of metal on his shirt. "I wear it twice a week when I come here. Old habit. Helps me remember who I used to be." The bartender approached their table with 2 glasses of whiskey. "Gunny, those are on the house. You and your friend." Martinez nodded his thanks. Staff Sergeant, tell me about your service. Where did you deploy? For the next hour, Torres found himself in conversation with someone whose training methods had influenced his own military education. Martinez asked questions that demonstrated understanding of modern combat operations while sharing perspectives that came from decades of preparing young Marines for exactly the situations Torres had encountered overseas. Gunny, Torres said as their conversation wound down, can I ask why you don't wear your rank or decorations? Why just a name tag? Martinez considered the question while finishing his whiskey. Son, there's a difference between pride and display. I'm proud of my service, proud of the Marines I trained, proud of what we accomplished together. But wearing ribbons and rank in civilian bars tend to create conversations I'd rather not have with people who weren't there. He touched the name tag again. This small piece of metal reminds me that once a Marine, always a Marine. But it doesn't intimidate civilians or invite questions about classified training methods or operations I can't discuss. Torres understood. Military service created bonds that transcended rank and branch, but it also created separation from civilian life that could become isolation if not carefully managed. Sir, Torres said, what you did tonight, that wasn't just helping a soldier. You protected someone you'd never met because of what he represented. Martinez stood up, preparing to leave. Staff Sergeant, I spent 26 years teaching young men that Marines take care of Marines. That didn't end when I retired. That doesn't end because you're Army instead of Corps. Service members take care of service members. As Martinez walked toward the exit, Torres called after him. Gunny, thank you for tonight and for everything you taught the Marines who trained me. Martinez paused at the door and looked back. Son, you handled yourself with honor tonight. Whoever trained you did their job well. After Martinez left, Torres sat alone at the booth, thinking about the encounter that had revealed how military bonds transcended official service. The man who had intervened wasn't seeking recognition or thanks. He had simply done what his training and experience had taught him to do, protect someone who needed protection. The bartender approached with another whiskey. That man has been coming here for 5 years, he said. First time I've ever seen him talk to anyone besides ordering drinks. Torres looked at the name tag Martinez had left on the table, apparently by accident, but possibly on purpose. The small piece of metal represented decades of service, thousands of Marines trained, and a commitment to protecting others that survived retirement and civilian life. Duddy picked up the name tag and walked to the bar. When Gunny Martinez comes in next week, please give this back to him and tell him Staff Sergeant Torres said Semper Fidelis. The bartender nodded. Marine thing. Torres smiled. Military thing. Some bonds don't break when you take off the uniform. 2 weeks later, Torres received a package at his apartment. Inside was a book about Marine Corps history and a handwritten note. Staff Sergeant, thought you might find this interesting. The principles don't change, just the application. Respect and honor. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez, Ret. Torres kept the note in his wallet, next to his military ID, as a reminder that service creates connections that transcend rank, branch, and active duty status. That night at O'Malley's had taught him something that wasn't covered in any military manual. Veterans take care of veterans, even when they're wearing civilian clothes and trying to blend into backgrounds where their service doesn't show. Martinez continued his routine at O'Malley's. But now other patrons occasionally recognized the small name tag and understood that the quiet man in the corner booth carried history that connected him to current service members in ways that civilian life couldn't break. Because once a Marine, always a Marine. Once a protector, always a protector. Once committed to taking care of those who serve, always committed to ensuring that service members know they are not alone. Even in civilian bars where their uniforms make them targets for people who don't understand what those uniforms represent. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's past revealed itself to protect you? Have you met someone whose service continued long after their official duty ended? Someone who wore their history quietly until circumstances demanded they remember who they used to be? Share their story in the comments below. Tell us what city you're watching from, because some stories remind us that heroes don't retire. They just change how they serve. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and help us honor those who continue to serve even after the uniform comes off. We'll see you in the next one. And remember, the next time you see someone wearing a small name tag, a discreet pin, or a faded tattoo that speaks of military service, understand that you might be looking at someone whose commitment to protecting others survived their transition to civilian life. Some bonds are stronger than discharge papers,